Well, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Master the NEC, where we talk about the National Electrical Code, all things electrically related. My name's Paul Abernathy, your host. As always, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with me. As today, we're going to look at some exam prep questions and how to dissect them and how to not dig too deep in trying to answer the questions so that you get lost in that endless loop where you really start to stress out. So we're going to talk about it. And today we're going to look at 3 questions that are very common on an exam. Now, maybe not how we've written them here, but in some form or fashion, they're found on exams. So we're going to kind of look at them. We'll dissect it. And I want to remind you of a couple things. Firstly, when you see a question on an exam, don't read too much into it. Again, there's a difference between an exam question that will give you just enough information to answer the question versus real life aspects where you might want more information because you have different options that you have to choose. So again, let's not overthink the question. Let's answer the question, be very focused on it. And remember, this is an exam. We just want to pass the exam. Now, we studied, whether you're in a Fast Trax program or on your own, we've studied to retain and learn the code. But now we're just in an exam environment. We need to pass that exam. Okay. Now, I should mention before we do that, also, I want to thank all of you out there who have visited electricianpride.com and helped with the shirts and t-shirts like the one I've got going on here. You really can't see it, but it's got the Power Wheel logo. Wear that into the exam. They probably won't even notice it. If you have a question, you can go, oh, there's the formula. But check with your, check first. I don't say Paul told you could do it. They probably won't know they will, unless they watch the video. But thank you for checking out Electrician Pride. Again, we've got shirts, we've got neat stickers, we've got mugs, we've got the Tesla stickers, all kinds of things over there, phone cases, gosh, I don't know, bags, tote bags, long sleeve shirt, short sleeve, and it got them in the master electrician, journeyman, electrical engineer, inspector. We've got the Tesla, the code wizardry. We've got the code mafia. There's tons of stuff over there. Just kind of peruse it. And again, thank you for supporting us on electricianpride.com. And they are the sponsors of this episode. Okay. And so thank you again. Check it out. Now, also, I want you to stick around to the end of this video because I'm going to give you a special code that gets you a huge discount, okay, on our courses. So stick around for that if you're new to this channel and you are thinking of getting into our educational programs that we offer. Again, we have programs on residential, commercial, industrial, grounding and bonding, which is one of our favorite. Exam prep, we have Electricity 101 to learn all the basic fundamentals of electricity, magnetism, theory, all that good stuff. All of those available over on our website, masterthenec.com, as well as electricalinstructor.com, which is our academy. So again, great stuff. Check it out. But we also, again, appreciate you and all the support here at electricianpride.com. So thank you very much for that continued support. But so make sure you listen to the end so that coupon. All right, now, and also make sure you hit that subscribe button because I do content all the time. You never know when it's coming. So make sure you click that little subscribe button and even hit that bell on the YouTube channel to notify you anytime a new video or podcast is uploaded to our channel. Okay. Again, we're making that content for you so that you can get better at understanding not only electricity, but also the National Electrical Code, which is the minimum safety standard for the electrical industry. All right. That's enough of that. Let's move on to today's presentation. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some questions and we're going to answer them and we're going to dissect them. And again, I want to remind you, they are common on exams. Don't overthink them. All right. So let's get to it. Very first question we're going to run into is very common on an exam. In some form or fashion, it gets asked on an exam. Question number 1. What load in kVA, so it looks like they want an answer in kVA, shall be added to the service for an office building with 200 receptacles? Okay. First thing that I notice on an exam is that this has nothing to do with residential. So it has nothing to do with 3 VA per square foot. It has nothing to do with the receptacles already, general use receptacles are already considered in our calculation at 3 VA per square foot. Has nothing to do residential. This is office building, very much commercial. So first things first. Also notice that it's asking me what load for a service calc. So it means that it's not asking me what the actual connected value is of something, like simply taking the nameplate values and adding them all up. That's the connected. Here it's telling me, look, I need to know what a load is going to be for the service. So this is open to say if I have any demands that can be applied. Okay. Now, you're going to find out that when we apply demand factors to things, it's going to be as permitted. Okay. It means that it's optional. You could take the full connected load value of something and run with it, but it's going to mean your services are overly large than necessary. And again, you're not taking into account any diversity, which you can take into account in the National Electrical Code. So when you're taking an exam, always consider, unless it says it otherwise, to resolve the question to the best possible answer. And for us, the best possible answer is the smallest size service necessary to handle the load. Okay, so that is the best possible choice. So we always want to apply any demand factors that we have available to us, unless it asks me for the connected load. Then it might be before I apply any demands. Now, when it says what load, it could have also said, what is the demand load? Okay, it says, what is the calculated load that shall be added to the service? There's ways it could have said it that imply that you need to do some type of calculation. Okay, so here it says what load in kVA shall be added. So this is about a service calc. So it wants to be able to do all of the demands if they're applicable, and now apply this value to the service, okay, for this office building. All right, so kind of dissecting it, what we're doing here. We know it's 200 receptacles. We know it's not a residence, so we don't have to worry about anything in 220.14J with 3 VA per square foot. Ain't got nothing to do with that. Another thing we'll notice in this question, it doesn't give me any dimensions of the building, so I don't get into that, and I'll show you why that might be important on an exam or not. But right here, it doesn't give me any of that. In your mind, you might thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't there two things I have to compare in order to be able to calculate this? In reality, yes. In the question, no. Because the question's just giving you a certain amount of information that you could solve the question for. So let's solve it. Let's go to look at what we're dealing with here. All right, so first things first, now we'll look at the code so we can get a better grip of it here. We know there's 200 receptacles. Now you see this 180. Now that is 180 VA per strap. So before we even start dissecting this, we need to know where that comes from. So let's go to the National Electrical Code and look at it and see what it is that we're dealing with. And let's go all the way up here to receptacles. Okay, so you see on the screen, it says 220.14I, receptacle outlets. Now, it says, except as covered in 220.14J and K, okay, which are different aspects of it here, except as what's covered there, it says receptacle outlets shall be calculated at not less than 180 VA per single or for each multiple receptacle on one yoke. Okay, now let's think about this for a second. If I have a single receptacle, a simplex we call it, and it's on one metal strap that goes into a box, that is 180 VA. Okay, now if I have a duplex receptacle, then that is two single receptacles on one strap. That's why we call it a duplex, okay, over and under, okay? Or if you turn it sideways, side by side, however you want to look at it. That's two receptacles. That's more than one, it's two. So in this case, if they're mounted on a single strap, then it's still 180 VA. If I had three receptacles mounted on a single strap, still 180 VA. Okay. Now, where it changes is when you see this piece right here, and I will highlight it for you. It says right here, it says a single piece of equipment consisting of multiple receptacles comprised of 4 or more receptacles, and you might have seen them. They're square. They've got 4 different receptacles on it, and some of them might have as many as 6 receptacles on it. But typically, there's about 4 receptacles on it. Notice that if it's 4 or more, they shall be calculated at not less than 90 VA per receptacle. Okay? So in this case, if it's a 4, then it simply would be 90 times 4, 360 VA, because there's 4 single receptacles built into this one piece of equipment. Okay, so, but if we've got just a single receptacle, 2 receptacles mounted, duplex receptacle, very standard, that is 180 VA per strap. So that's where we get the 180 VA. Also, while we're here, I'm going to give you an exercise in highlighting. I am not a believer in over-highlighting your code book. I believe that you use the tabs, the standard tabs that you buy, and also I should let you know, we're getting some custom tabs made that are not like anybody else's in the industry. They're going to be smaller, but they're going to be more durable because they will connect on both sides of the page rather than just on one side where they can rip. But don't bug me about that because, again, we've got to work through that. But we're trying to get our own custom tabs that we'll have available on our website. And they're going to be of very important code sections and things and articles that I feel are really important for exam prep and for use in the real world. Okay, so again, it's going to be the bare minimum necessary to be successful, because I don't also believe in over tabbing either. So again, but let me give you a highlighter rule. Okay, so here's one thing I tell people. I'm not a believer in overly highlighting. I believe this is an example of what I would highlight. I would highlight this, okay, and I would do that in, say, a yellow, and then I would come down and highlight this portion. Not less than 180 VA for single or for each multiple receptacle on one yoke. I would highlight that in yellow. And then I would go over here and I would highlight 4 or more calculated not less than 90 VA per receptacle. And I would also do that in yellow. So I would use a title of one color, however you want to do it, and I would use the key components of the actual paragraph that stick out to me in another one, in another color. Why? Because I wanted to draw my attention. If you overly highlight things, like if I were to highlight this entire thing, then it gets lost. In an exam, I'm going to have questions that are going to have the answers in the questions. They're multiple choice. And they're going to have things that draw my attention. So when I go to here to find receptacle outlets, the questions more often than not are going to have something that pertains to the VA 180 or something about the 90 when it's 4 or more, and I need my mind to be drawn to that. If you just start highlighting everything on a page, then you're going to lose the benefit of that. And so again, I am a minimalist when it comes to highlight. I only believe in highlighting the key things. So in our Fast Tracks program, there's chevrons of certain code references. If we send you to a certain place in the code from our learning lesson, then you're going to do just this. You're going to highlight that section and the key things that's talked about in the lesson, and that's the only thing you're going to highlight in that entire paragraph, okay? Because that's the important pieces. They're not going to ask you anything about the random words in there. It's usually going to be something that's drawn to the important portion that's discussed in our learning lesson. And if you're not using our Fast Tracks program or any study program that we provide, still can use the same concept. Focus on the things that are important to the paragraph. That's what you're going to highlight. You don't want to over-analysis paralysis by highlighting everything, and all now you have is a page is full of nothing but highlights. It's not going to be beneficial to you. Trust me. Been doing this a long time. It's not going to work for you. All right, so anyway, so that's that part. So now let's go back real quick to the actual presentation, and we'll continue to work through this. So, okay, first thing, we had the 200. We see where the 180 VA comes from per strap. And again, the question just says receptacles, okay? Don't overthink it, okay? Even whether it's a simplex or duplexes, it's still one strap. So 200 times 180 VA equals 36,000 VA, or volt amperes. Now, you can bet that on an exam, they're probably going to give 36,000 as one of the answers. Well, in reality, that is your connected value, because we know that we get to apply some type of demand to it. Where do we get that allowance to apply demands? Okay, well, let's go back to the code because we need to see that now because we're working through this question, dissecting it piece by piece. And this is very common on an exam. And I have a question like this in the Fast Tracks program that students routinely get it wrong because they don't read into it and realize that we're allowed to apply a demand factor. Okay, we can derate. So let's go to the code and give it a look. Okay, so what we see here is it's allowing me, I now have what the value is in VA, Next, since we're talking about an office building, we're going to utilize K. Now, what does K tell us? Okay, K says in office buildings, and that's what our question was all about, it says the receptacle load shall be calculated to be the larger of 1 or 2. Okay, that's the power of or. Okay, in your code book, anytime you see or, it's saying you can either do this or you do that, but I want the larger of either or. Okay, now if you see the word and between two references, it means you have to meet this and you have to meet this. So that's what we call the power of or and the power of and within the National Electrical Code. Okay, just a little extra there. Now, another interesting thing. This is an example in a question where there's a real world, probably what will happen versus what's in the question. Notice what it says here in option 1 and 2. Okay, we want to take the larger of either or. The first one says the calculated load from 220.14i, which is what we just did, 180 VA per strap times 200 of them, that was 36,000. It says the calculated load from 220.14i after all demand factors have been applied. That's why it's calculated, not connected, calculated. So we're taking the value after we've applied a demand factor. So that's the first area that says, look, it's an office building. There's something else you can be able to do to it. The next one is option 2, and it says 11 VA per millimeter square, or like we do, 1 VA per square foot. Now, that's just not millimeter, that's meter square. Sorry. So I don't use it, so there you go. So 1 VA per square foot. Now, check this out. The question didn't give us any square footage, right? There's no way to do item 2. There's no way to do it. So in this question, in the real world, you might have 2 options that you have to compare. On an exam, you don't. You only have one, and that is to use number 1. Now, when it says after all demand factors have been applied, where and what do demand factors have anything to do with this? Okay, that's where you're going to say, well, it's receptacles, it's other than dwellings, so I have some allowances here to do. So if you scroll down, you'll notice that you'll run into something called 220.44. Now, 220.44 says receptacle loads calculated in accordance with 220.14H and I, okay, so if you used H or you used I, shall be permitted to be made subject to the demand factors given in table 220.42 or table 220.44, okay? Now, let's knock table 220.42 out of the way because our question's dealing with office buildings, okay? That was what our question was, and if you look at 42, office buildings aren't listed here, so it would have to be taken at 100% anyway. But if any of these others are applied, then you have an additional demand factor that can be applied. Ours has nothing to do with that in the overall calc. Ours is very much just to do with table 220.44, which is right here. Now, highlighting tip. You ready? In your study program, if you have an exam question that sends you to 220.44 or study question, then you're going to highlight this portion, okay, that's it. And then you're going to highlight this like that. Then you're going to do this portion of receptacle load, which demand factors applies, and that's it. That is all you're going to highlight because that draws your attention to it, okay? Now, since we're here, how are we doing this? Well, we already have our connected load. It's 36,000 VA for these receptacles at 180 VA per strap for 200 of them. Now, we already have direction that tells us that we can apply what? Some demand factors. There's diversity involved here. You're not going to use them all at the same time. So, first 10,000 kVA or less at 100%. The remaining over that 10,000, you simply take the value at 50%. Okay? So this is a percentage value of the VA. Okay, so let's go back to our PowerPoint and see how we can apply this. All right, in our question, we take the first 10,000 at 100%, so it was 36,000. So take 10,000, set it aside because we have to take it at full value. So set that aside. So that leaves us with 26,000. 26,000 times 50% because the 26 is the amount that's over 10,000. So at 50%, that's 13,000 VA. So You bring that 10,000 back and add it to the 13, that's 23,000 VA. But remember, we always get taught to solve it down into the VA when we're doing a calculation for loads, for services, and feeders. But remember now, here's where it can get tricky. The question might not be in tune with reality. It's a question. And the question wanted that value in what? kVA. So we have 23,000 VA. You're simply going to divide that by 1,000, and that's going to turn it into 23 kVA. Okay? And so again, just to make sure you're all on the same page, you take 23,000, divide it by 1,000, and 23. If they just gave you the kVA, 23, and you wanted to convert it to VA, it's 23 times 1,000. So again, division or multiplication, depending on which questions asked and always analyze what they want in the question. That's another thing that I notice a lot on our Fast Track programs. If you're not familiar with the Fast Track program, it is the world's best exam preparation program with real life type of simulation. Check that out on our website. Again, that is over at masterthenec.com. Check it out, or stick to the end. I'm going to give you a coupon code, save you a bundle of money. Okay, so hang in there with me. Don't leave me yet. And don't forget to subscribe and click that notification button, because I'm always doing things like this. Okay, all right. Now, so the question is answered. The answer to the question is 23 kVA. Okay, so to answer this question, what's the load in kVA? It's 23 kVA. We applied the demand factors. That's the amount that we're going to add to the load calculation. Pretty simple stuff, right? All right, next question we run into. Very common question. Okay, what is the load current or calculated load for a feeder conductors supplying a continuous load of 39 amperes and a single motor with an FLC of 24 amperes? Okay, in the real world, in reality, you might say, well, okay, I get the conductors, I get the 39 amps as being told that it's a continuous load. I get it. In reality, you need to understand something. When they tell you it's a continuous load, it's just telling you that that 39 amps is going to be running continuous and to treat it as continuous. You're not worried about in your mind going, wait a minute, aren't continuous loads any load that runs 3 hours or more? Which is true, but it's at its full maximum current for 3 hours or more. In this question, they're telling me up front, it's running at 39 amps and you will treat this as a continuous load. Now, a couple tips. If this was a branch circuit and that's all it was asking, then you're still going to have to take that 39 amps at 125% and size your conductors, right? Because again, usually the circuit breaker is the weakest link. So you're going to have to treat it that way. So just because it says it's a continuous load, that's just telling you that it's 39 amps and it's a continuous load. Sizing conductors or sizing overcurrent protected devices that are not rated at the full load rating or full amp rating, then you're going to take it and do the 39 times 125%. Okay, that's just branch circuit. So I wanted to give you that little tidbit, okay, because I get that question all the time. I got 39 amps of continuous load, Paul. Do I have to apply the 125%? Yes, if you're sizing conductors. But if your question asks, what is the continuous load? It's still 39 amps of continuous load. This is a good time for me to tell you to go watch my D-Rating Demystified, which I get into all those goodies. Again, go look for it. It's over on our channel. Now, so 39 amps continuous load. We told you how to do it with the branch circuit, but guess what? It's really no different for the feeder. You'll see. Next, single motor. It didn't say what kind of motor it was, didn't give me anything, but what it did give me was the FLC. The FLC, it tells me it's 24 amperes. I don't need, some people will say, well, wait a minute, I need to know what this is. I need to know the nameplate. I need to know. No, you don't. Not to answer the question. In real life, you might need additional information. Obviously, if you go to overloads, you got to have a nameplate because overloads don't use the FLC. They use the FLA or the amps that's listed on the nameplate. But everything else, a short circuit and ground fault protection, conductor sizing, feeders, all of those use the FLC values. In this question, don't overanalyze it. They have given you the FLC already. No need to go to the back in 430.248, 249, or 250 to get those FLC values of motors. Doesn't matter. They gave it to you. Be happy. Simple question to answer at this point. Okay, so 39 amps, continuous load, and we have the motor, single motor. Okay, now remember something. This is a feeder. This feeder has both, obviously, a continuous, let's say this is a continuous lighting load, whatever it is, it's continuous, and it's telling you also it has a motor. So there's two different loads that are being supplied by this feeder. Okay, all right, that's a given. Now let's kind of go look at the question. Let's go look at the answer and we'll work through it. All right, first things first, we're gonna kick it in now and say that this is a lighting load just so we can give some meaning to the continuous load. Again, it's a load that's pulled its maximum value for 3 hours or more, or when the code tells you something is continuous. In this case, it told us it's continuous. I'm going to associate with a lighting load so that people can kind of get in that mentality. So 39 amperes of continuous lighting loads is 39 times 125%, or 1.25, equals 48.75 amperes. Now remember, also in feeders, you have 215.2A1A that says you take all continuous loads at 125%. Of course, it also says take all non-continuous loads at 100%. So you would add the two. So if I had a feeder, let's forget the motor right now. If I had a feeder, and that feeder coming from a main panel and it's feeding loads, if that panel has continuous loads in it that it's feeding and non-continuous loads, I'm going to take all the continuous loads at 125%, and I'm going to take all of the non-continuous loads at 100%, whatever their rating is, okay? Add them together, and that's how I'm sizing my feeder, okay? Same thing here. The only difference is now I've got a motor involved. So let's look at the motor. So I have 24 amperes of single motor loads, the FLC, they gave it to me. So again, that's 24 times 1.25%, which equals 30 amps. Now, where did I get the guidance here? Okay, so if I was sizing a single motor by itself, then it would be 430.22. But what we're doing is we're doing a motor and some other load, okay? And so we would look at 430.24. And what it says is several motors or a motor or motors and other loads. Well, in this case, we've got motor loads and we've got other continuous loads. So what does it say at 430.24? Okay, let's go look at it and then we'll come back. Okay, so let's go to the code. And I will get here. We'll just kind of click this to go back to the top. It's a benefit of the electronic version online. All right, and nobody asked me if they have a PDF version of the NEC anymore because they do not. You have to pay for a subscription, but there is a free view version on NFPA. You just got to get a membership, which is free, and then you can look at it online. You can't print it, do anything like that, but then you've got your paid version like what I have. So let's go down to 230. Now, remember what I said about the 430. I just said 230. Excuse me, 430.22 single motor. Well, there it is, and it tells you to take it at 125%, right? But we have what? We have something a little different here. So we're going to go down to 430.24. Several motors. Now, this could be a case where I have a feeder that's got 3 motors, okay? And I'm sizing that feeder to handle those 3 motors. Okay, way to do it. But in this case, we have an other load, and we use lighting so we can bring context to the other load. But we have other loads, and then we have that motor. How do we apply it? Well, here it says the conductor is supplying several motors or a motor or motors and other loads shall have an ampacity not less than the sum, cumulative sum of each of the following. 125% of the FLC, that's why we needed that FLC rating of the highest rated motor. We only had one. So that was the 24 at 125%, which was the 30 amps. And then it says it takes the, in our case right here, 125% of the continuous non-motor loads. And again, we already know that that 39 amps was a non-motor load, but it was a continuous load. Okay, so we took that at 125%. So let's go back. And that's where we're getting that allowance for the exam question. So here you see we did that. We took the motor at 125% and of FLC, and 120% of the other loads that are continuous. Now, what's the answer? Well, I didn't put it on the screen because I wanted you to work it out. And what is the answer? 48.75 plus 30 equals 78.75. So I need a conductor that can handle at least 78.75. And then, of course, I have to protect that conductor at its ampacity. Okay? This question was simply trying to find out what the value is. 78.75 was the value to answer this question. Okay? So again, that is what the load current is. And that is all the question is asking. Don't start getting into overcurrent devices. If you don't know how to do that, go watch our video, Derating Demystified, and I go into all that. But we're studying for an exam. Don't overthink the question. Simply answer the question. And that is the answer, 78.75. Okay? It is simple question. Let's go to the last question we're going to discuss in this one here. Question number 3. What is the demand load? Again, another way of asking a question that says, hey, guess what? It means you got some demand you got to apply here. For a school with an area of 20,000 square feet and a total connected load supplied by the design engineer of 206.6 kW. Now, this is interesting because, and it also tells us to use the optional method. Now, we can always use a standard method, but here the question is saying use the optional method. Now, a couple things. We're using optional method, so obviously we're in part 4 of 220. That comes to mind. We already know there's a demand factor that has to be applied based on the question. Now, we're getting supplied a total connected load, which tells you that it's totally everything connected coming from the engineer who designed the system. It's the nameplate values, everything is being presented to us at a total of 206.6 kW, okay? And it's dumped in our lap. And we have to use the optional method to come up with what the actual demand load for this question is going to be. Very interesting question. So where do we have to look in the code first? Let's go to the code and we can see what we're doing. We know we're doing a school, okay? And we know we're in the optional method. So you're savvy enough and you've been studying, and I know you have. If you're in our Fast Tracks program, I know you're all on top of this. You're going to go to Article 220 and you're going to look at the optional method, which is part 4. And then you're quickly going to peruse the bolds until you get to schools. Should stand out. Let's see how it does. Let's go to the browser. And we'll go back to the top and we'll just jump down and we'll go to 220. And we're going to go to part 4. We'll just kind of, there is no real benefit online. You just got to kind of scroll your way through it. So there's part 5. So we went a little bit far. There we go. Part 4, optionals. Okay. So we quickly scanning. We know this is very specific to schools, house loads, calculated. Oh, schools right here. So we have 220.86. I would highlight that. Okay. If I'm kind of giving you some tips on highlighting, and let's read it and see how we're going to apply this. Now it says, let me make sure that y'all are seeing this in the screen. Yes. Okay. This says the calculation for feeders or service loads, kind of what we got asked in a question, for schools shall be permitted in accordance with 220.86. That's where we are, in lieu of part 3. Means that we're allowed to use the optional instead of using the standard. The optional is always going to result in a smaller service. It is allowing more diversity and allows me to apply some demand factors. So you're always going to get a little more when using the optional method. Now, in our case, the question said that you use the optional method, okay? Now, if you want to know how to do a standard calculation, we have videos that talk about commercial buildings and treating them as such and how to calculate it as a standard calculation. But more often than not, this is what you're going to run into, an optional method. So we want to make sure that you know how to do it here. Now, it's much easier for them to ask you this question using the optional than it is for you to do this calculation under the standard, because there's so many other pieces involved and they're just not going to ask you to do that on an exam. That's why we've kind of tailored this question to the optional, because it allows them to kind of ask you a question and give you some realistic expectations on answering that question, not overly cumbersome type of question. All right, so in lieu of part 3 of this article, we're equipped with, okay, important, we're equipped with electric space heating, air conditioning, or both. Now, our question did not give either or. And you've heard me say, well, not going to assume. However, there is absolutely no way that they're going to allow a school to be built without air conditioning. Just not going to happen. Okay? So while this is good, they're not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So I'm not making an assumption here. I know what the code says, but for our question, if they didn't say something in there that says that it does not have heating or does not have air conditioning or anything like that, then I'm not going to let the mind wander. I'm going to know that, and you might say, well, Paul, isn't that assuming? Look, come on, be smart. Be focused here. This question changes if they say that it doesn't have space heating or that it doesn't have air conditioning. It didn't mention that in the question. Just roll with it. That's why I say an exam might be different than real life, whereas these things can come into play. Okay? All right, now it says, the connected load to which the demand factors in table 220.86, which the engineer supplied to us, I think it was 206.6 kW, apply shall include all of the interior and exterior lighting, power, water heating, cooking, and other loads. And the larger of the air conditioning load or space heating load within the building or structure. Okay? Now, in our question, the design engineer, he's already given it to us. In the real world, you gotta ferret this out from them. In an exam world, it's right there. It's already in the question. Don't overthink it. Okay? Okay. Next. This is not relevant to our question, but we'll read it and we'll just kind of work this out. It says, feeders and service conductors whose calculated load is determined by this optional calculation shall be permitted to have their neutral load determined in 220.61. The reason it has to say that is because 220.61 is under part 3. And so, again, you have to have permission to be able to do that. And again, you have to be able to understand standard methods in order to be able to calculate neutral loads. You don't do that with the optional methods. So, again, you really need to know how to do both. And hopefully that engineer who's supplying you it in real life does, because all schools are going to be engineer designed. Just saying. All right. So again, let's not read too much into it. We're trying to answer the question. And I'm trying not to turn this into a lesson, but exam prep question review. All right. All right. Now, one thing to remember, this portion shall not apply to portable classroom buildings. So where you have schools, but you have those portable classrooms, doesn't apply here. They get calculated as normal. They do not apply to the provisions of this rule in this section, which is section 86, dealing with schools under the optional method. Just remember that. Doesn't apply portable classroom buildings. Now, let's look at this table. This table is important because we had to get from the engineer, we had to know what the KW was, right? That's important. And we needed to know the square footage. And they gave us both of that in the question. Now, here's what it says, and here's where people get confused. It says, optional method, it says demand factors for feeders and service conductors for schools. Notice this is demand factor in percentage. This is the connected load in VA. And the 3 VA, you take at 100%. 3 to 20 VA per square foot, you take at 75. And the next is 20 VA, okay, and higher, at 25, okay? That's the remainder, okay? So the first 3 VA, 100%. Over 3, up through 20, 75%. And the remainder over 20 at 25%. Now, you're thinking, what values am I taking? Am I taking the demand value or am I taking how do I do this math? Don't worry, we're going to show you. But remember how we're applying these percentages now, okay? That's important. And again, school questions, whether you ever wire a school, they seem to always appear on exams for some reason. So remember what we said. We had 206,600 kW, and we had a square footage of 20,000. So the first thing you do is take that kW, divide it into the square feet so that we can get a VA per square foot. So we're always going to check our math. We always do that. So 206,600 divided into 20,000 equals 10.33 VA per square foot. So now we have our VA per square foot. Now we get to use the values in the table. The first 3 VA at 100%. So we might as well take that 3 VA off the top. Just get rid of it right away and put it aside because that's 100%. The remainder in our equation, since we didn't go over 20, we're not going to use the 25%. We're going to use the 75, which is over 3, but not over 20. Okay, up to 20. And so in our case here, what do we have? So you take the 10.33 minus 3, and that gives you 7.33. So that's the remainder. Now we're going to apply 75% to it. And that is 7.33 VA times 75%. That's what it said in the code. And that is 5.4972. Okay? Now, that is the remainder. Now, what do you think you do? Add the two back together. Take the original 3 and take the 8.4975, or excuse me, the 5.4975, add them together, and that is 8.4975 VA per square foot. Now, this is the last step. We now have to convert this and get this to a value that we can use. So you take the 8.4975 VA per square foot times, how many square foot do we have? 20,000. 8.4975 times 20,000 is 169,950 VA. But of course, 220.5 says anything that's what? Well, let's back up. 169,950, divide that by 1,000. Remember, because we got VA, we want to convert it to KVA. That's when it breaks it down, and it's 169.95. Now we can say 220.5b says that if it's 0.5 or greater, that we can round up. So in this case, 169.95 kVA would round to 170 kVA, which is actually 170,000 VA. Okay, so we're answering the question though, right? So the question wanted to know what the demand value is. Okay, so this is why I'm coming back. If they want the answer in VA, give it in VA. If they want the answer in KW, give it in KW. Remember, VA and KW are synonymous for calculations like this. If they want it in KVA, give it in KVA. Remember, give them what they ask for, and that's important. Always look at the question and determine what they want. I've got an answer here. If they want it in VA, I've got an answer. If they want it in KVA, I've got an answer, okay? Always think about the question and how they're asking the question. And it's really just that simple when you start breaking it down and looking at it that way. So hopefully, those have been helpful to you. Those are just some common questions that we see on an exam. And I just wanted to give you the basic steps. Obviously, we could go a lot deeper in that. We can analyze the rounding of the VAs or the KVAs, and we can look at all that. But again, I want to be able to just give you the basic concept of what you're going to encounter on an exam. And those are what you're going to do, and that's how you would solve. Those are the steps that you're going to follow to solve it. So hopefully you got something out of that. Until next time, stay safe. God bless.